So this is my first video showcasing the process of my B5 Logic sounds. I'm just going to be focusing at this moment on the roaming piece, which was the music that I wanted to be played as the player just walks through the open atmosphere and what they hear when they're roaming about, essentially, which is why I've named it roaming. So let's just start with the kick of the drums, but we'll start with the kick. I actually watched a video on how to make 8-bit sounding drums, and he actually used a synthesizer, which I found quite interesting. So I decided to use the ES2 on Logic. So if we open that up, we can see what I did with the kick. If we also solo that, just to show you what it sounds like. So as you can see, it's got that kind of brushy 8-bit sound, but also got that kind of knocky kind of sound. A lot of that is to do with the resonance that I've got here. If I put that to the max, you can hear the frequency that's actually being altered there. I didn't want too much of that in, so I put it down around the middle, around 45. I've also got that's on a bypass filter with some drive added to make it sound really punchy and a bit louder, and also a bit of a cut just to really bring out those higher frequencies, which carried on a lot of that brushy feel. But I then took some of these out later with the EQ. I'll get into more of that later. But also added some low frequencies there as well. So now onto that ADSR. What I did was I started with my attack. You can see that's around 13 to 41 ms. I'll quickly show you what that sounds like if I were to put it to the max. So it's got that kind of brushy sound. I did want a bit of that in, but obviously not a lot, so I put that quite short. I wanted it to straight away get some of those transients to just fall straight in and then hit immediately and punch through. So that was a perfect kind of speed for my attack. My decay, which was the time that it takes from it to reach its sustain back to fall off back to the original initial level. I didn't want that too quick, so I just put that around 140 ms, because if I were to put it max, you'll hear it carries on some of that brushy sound, which I didn't want much of that in again. So yeah, sustain I didn't do much with. I just left it at 0 because I didn't want the note to sustain for that long. I wanted it to be very quick and then stop. That's how a kick would normally work. The release, I've got around 60 ms. The release is essentially just the time it takes. It's very similar to the decay, but it's not the fall off, it's just how quick it goes in general from the sustain point to the lowest point. So I put that around 65 ms because I found that was quite perfect for what I wanted. And I've also got other things there, like a bit of distortion, a bit soft distortion. That's on around 8 dB, so not too much, but still quite enough that you can hear it. And bear in mind that all of these were made on a noise filter. Most other things that I haven't really talked about, that was because I didn't really alter it. It was just how it naturally was on the synthesizer anyway. But yeah, that's what I did with the kick. So if we go on to the other 3 instruments, I'll quickly go through these. Actually, first, I can show you what else I did with the kick with the EQ. So I've got a bit of a boost around 136 Hz because that makes it punch through a lot more. Got a little low boost there, around 55 Hz, just a little bit to add in some of those frequencies. Around here is where a lot of those kick frequencies fall, so I wanted those to come up quite a lot. This was actually from a Logic preset that I altered, by the way. I also took out some of those mids, the high mids there, around 800, and took out some of the lows that I added with the ES2. So you can see how I really altered the sound, and I can show you what it sounds like without the EQ. So it basically just adds in more of those low frequencies and takes out some of the high frequencies that I added with the ES2. I've also got some buses that I added and some compression and other things like that. The compression isn't that hard, it's around a -20 threshold, and it decreases 1 dB per 6.1, which is quite didn't make it too loud, but it also didn't make it too quiet either. The buses I've added here, I sent all my drums to bus 6 in case I wanted to then edit all my drums together. And I've also got a side chain that I added, and I'll show you that later. My snare, hi-hats, again, very similar processing. The ES2 synthesizer was used for all of these. So for the snare, very similar ADSR. Again, I've got a noise oscillator, only the decay was quite a bit longer because I wanted to keep in some of that long, sustained, brushy sound. Let me just solo this and show you what this sounds like. You can see it's just a bit less snappy than the kick, but also quite accurate to how a snare might sound. So that's the decay. The attack is a bit shorter than the kick because that the attack's about the same as the kick actually. The attack's around 92 ms. This was great for really making that snappy snare sound, but it wasn't too punchy like the kick. And in the release, didn't do too much of it. I just kept it around 99 ms. That really helped it sustain a bit more, but also come down quite quickly. Again, I've got some distortion. This time it's hard because it really brought out some of those higher frequencies, and you can tell, see here that I've cut out some of those low frequencies. The cuts didn't matter too much. It just got the tonality more than anything because I then altered them with the EQ anyway. But I've got about the same resonance as the kick. Again, I can show you what that would sound like if I put that to the max. Just adds a lot more of those higher frequencies, but I've got more lower resonance there. And again, I've got some drive there as well. So my hi-hats, I essentially just copied the same patch and then altered them. So my open hi-hat, I had this on every fourth beat of the closed hi-hat just to give it some variation. So on that fourth beat, that's what you could hear there, that was the open hi-hat. And I've just cut out all of those lows just to make it a really high brushy sound, and made all the ADSR in it quite long. As you can see, I've got about 160 ms on the decay. The attack's still really short, and the release is also quite short, but not too short, which is really nice. And I've got some distortion on that, same kind of distortion, which essentially all of these have a bit of distortion because it added a lot of that hissy sound, which I wanted to emulate the 8-bit drums. And on both of these, I've got some buses that's got some reverb on it that I'll show you here. Not too long, not much pre-delay, not too big either. I didn't want it to be really powerful, like an 80s pop ballad, for example, but I still wanted, a bit of reverb there to make it punch through a lot. And then again, I've sent them to the drum bus. On the hi-hat, I've got a compressor. It's not too hard, but it's enough to keep the dynamic range regulated. And I've got some EQ here, a bit of a trough on the mids here, because I didn't really want much body to this sound. Those lows, which carried a lot of the resonance from that brushy sound, I boosted that a bit, and the high-end frequencies here, which gave it that hissing sound, I put up quite a lot. And I'll show you quickly how I altered the EQ on the snare. Similar to the kick, I've boosted quite a bit on the around 170 Hz with quite a low Q factor. That's because I wanted to make it punch through a lot more on the low end, but I've also got a bit of a high boost there and a low boost there. Sorry, just to really make it sound more even out essentially. And so it has got a bit of body to it, but not as much as like the kick, for example. And the closed hi-hat is very similar to the snare actually, only it was a lot shorter with the decay, because if you listen to it, you don't really want it to sound too sustained. You just want it to be very quick, kind of like a tap, and I didn't have much resonance on there because that would have given it a knocky sound, because I've got some of those lows to low mids cut out there. I've got a compressor on there as well. Most of these things are compressed because I find that compressors are really good for these kinds of sounds, because it's hard to, when you're using synthesizers and things, you'll find the dynamic range is quite, because of how the ADSR works, it would be quite uneven sometimes. And then I've got this around 4K, 4.2K hertz. That really helped with that kind of sizzle that you want with a kind of the brighter frequencies. You want those on a hi-hat, and then cut out a lot of those lows because again, and the mids because you don't want much body to it. So yeah, it's basically just high boost on that. So that's my drums there. So if I just hide these, we can go on to the other instruments. So for my other instruments, I'll start with my synths that I made here. These were originally just presets that I then altered to my own liking. So we've got a right pan and a left pan, both at 14, I believe. And I've just taken out some of those low mids. I didn't do much because again the ES2 has its own frequency controllers here, filters. So I've got a sine wave on my first modulator, which you can hear if I just show you. You can see it kind of dips in and out, and you can in some notes you can hear the sine wave a bit more, and in some you can hear the square wave here on the second oscillator. On this, I've got sustain quite high on the oscillator here. The decay is quite short. Again, I wanted this to sound more sustained on the square wave here, so I kept those. And then on the sine wave with a bit of FM into it, we've got about 500 ms decay and 11 ms attack. This is because I wanted this sound. I wanted that sound to be a lot more prominent, I guess, and a lot more sharp than the other square wave. So that was my synthesizer patch there that I made, and then I edited it with the EQ that you just saw, and some compression, tiny bit of makeup gain, threshold at around minus 12 dB, and for every 1.5 dB it would decrease 1. That's a lot of the ebbing and flowing of the volume that you can hear there in the modulation, and that really helps make it sound a bit more variated. And then those two synths together, so you can hear that this one's it's got more of a slightly distorted sound, but it's also a little bit more pad-like actually, because I've got, as you can see if I show you, I'm using the same two oscillators. They're both edited a bit differently, but everything's quite actually long on this one. Not too long, not much different from the other one, but yeah. And I've got some cut off here, and I've blended them both together, and some resonance around the same. The blends didn't sound too different, which I quite liked, but it added a bit more body to those frequencies, because I was blended in two different frequency cutoffs together, which is interesting. And I've also got some distortion and chorus here, and some effects like that. Bright tone, which really made it sound quite variated throughout the whole thing. I've then got some buses. This was actually the snare verb that I used, but I found that just leaving it on 0 worked best. I didn't really want much reverb, but I have got a little tiny bit here. This was just because I tried out with the snare verb, but I didn't really like it, so I could just remove that and it would make no difference. The bass, I'll show you the bass quickly. So yeah, I like this sound. It's quite messy and quite distorted, but it was really nice for a nice bass line. It punches through quite a bit. I've got around those low mids boosted. Similar technique to the EQ on the snare. It just really helps it punch through a bit, and I've decreased some of the body there and boost some of the highs. I didn't change this. This was also a So if we go into the bass, I'll just show you what that sounds like quickly. And that melody like loops throughout. It's quite nice. All I've really done was I boosted some lows and low mids just to make it punch through a lot more. Similar kind of technique to the snare. And I've got mostly a sine wave, but there is a saw that kind of blend and another sine. But I used a different sine wave here because this one obviously has FM added onto it. Attack, I wanted quite a nice little range of the attack on the sine wave. I didn't want it to sound too long, so I just added the sustain was quite long though, but everything else was quite short. That added a bit of bite to it, which I quite liked. If we go on to the saw wave here, the sustain, this helped it modulate by itself using the FM, and it would blend all of these together. But with the sustain, a bit lower, bit underneath envelope 3 with the sine wave here, you can hear it punch through a bit more sometimes. And then with the first one, very short on both attack and decay, and this was great for really bringing out the punchiness of this the sine wave here with the FM. With a cut, I tried 2 different cuts, but I decided that blending it on its own with this was the best. Got a bit of a soft distortion on there. I did experiment with some chorus, but I didn't like it. Again, the bright tone, similar to the synthesizers. I've got the cut here boosted, trough to about 12 dP. Some resonance on there as well, and again I'll show you what that sounds like if I was to increase that to the max. So not much of a difference, but you can tell it adds quite a lot of buzziness, and I did want a bit of that in, but not too much. So yeah, that's the bass synth patch, and the effects on there as well. I'll go into these before the little pad because this is quite interesting. So these are actually two different layers of the 2 kotos here. So I actually just used a normal software instrument for these, except I added some EQ and edited that in my own way. I wanted a little tiny bit of bass, but as you can see, there's not much frequency that sits around there anyway, so it didn't need much. 1K, I wanted a little bit of a sizzle to it, but not too much. This is because it really brought out that 8-bit sound, which obviously has a lot of those higher, brushier, kind of distorted frequencies, which is around the high end. This frequency here was, I went through and found the frequencies, and I didn't really like how this sounded, so I'll just show you that. So it's quite twangy. I didn't want too much twang on this, so I just turned that down. The reason I used the koto here is because I looked at some of the Stardew Valley pieces, and a lot of it was very farm-based, and that calls for a lot of string instruments such as guitars and kotos, and also a lot of these games. The 3 influences I used, by the way, were Legend of Zelda, Stardew Valley, and Pokemon. And all of these 3 games have they're either by Japanese companies, or they have Japanese influence in. So a koto is a great way. It's a Japanese instrument, so it's a great way of doing that. And on this, same kind of melody. It's just a C to an F, and then some notes ascending and descending throughout. But for this, I wanted to bring out a bit more of that twang, and also to sound a bit more broken down and kind of eerie, to be honest. So I added some tremolo, quite not too deep, but you can hear enough to hear it. And then the EQ I added here was around those mids, just a tiny bit. Added just a tiny bit of body to it. I didn't want too much. And then this high boost here added some nice twang, which I quite liked. And then I've also got some reverb on that snare, just some normal reverb. I'll show you that actually. The same one as the snare, but yeah, obviously we've got that same kind of controls there. But I added 2 because I also added reverb swell, which is really interesting. So I wanted it curving up. If you think of that as how the room affects the sound. I wanted those twangy kind of frequencies to have more space to them, so I did that, and obviously if I reversed it, this is what it would sound like if I just solo. It kind of makes it more curved up, and you can hear the kind of pre-delay coming in a lot earlier than it would if it wasn't reversed. So finally on this, we'll go into the pad. I did look at some other I did look at some other influences. One of the games I looked at was Terraria, and if you look at the opening theme of that, I'll put it into my website. It's got like a kind of a pad that leads in at the start, and I took influence from that, and it goes like this. If I just turn that off. It gives it quite a nice intro, and this also helped a lot when making transitions on the Fmod piece, because you could make a transition just from that, and it would signify when that music's coming in. But what I did for this pad, this was a original patch, but usually it would be on the analog. That's what the patch was. But I didn't really like that. If you take a listen. It's got a lot of body to it, kind of windy, and it was a bit too atmospheric. I just wanted it to sound very simple, and so then I put it on the table synthesizer. But I'll just show you some of the effects and controls we've got on there. So if I go on to, we've got some vibrato here that you can see how that's being affected with the LFOs. I had a bit of a low pass on there because I did want some of that kind of boomy depth to it, but I wanted most of it to be high, which then I added onto with the EQ here. Bit of compression, not too much. It was quite nicely even with the range, but I didn't want it to be too loud at some point, so I put it quite low with the ratio. So every 2 dB, one's increase, so it's essentially halved if you think of it that way. And then I had some buses. This bus is not mixed, so I had some reverb there, and I also had the same reverb swirl. So it's a very similar processing to the coated reverb swirl there. So yeah, if we just take a quick listen of all of that together. One more thing as well, I've actually got a pan automation on this pad that I did with the touch, and I just controlled it as it played, and it wrote it onto it essentially, and you can hear it come in and out, and if you listen properly with headphones, you'd be able to hear that a lot more because it's got that stereo feel to it. So yeah, that's my Roman piece, and in my next video I'll go on to my other pieces.